Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. A couple of different points we want to look at today. First and foremost is obviously we continue to watch the situation in and near Bakhmut as the Russian noose continues to tighten around the multiple Ukrainian brigades that are still deployed inside of Bakhmut. We'll have a look at that here in just a minute. We're also going to have a look at what the Russian war goals and war aims continue to look like and continue to evolve. And I think it's important to listen to what the Russians are saying, not only what the Ukrainians are saying in terms of their goals and military objectives, but also the Russians as well. And it is glaringly apparent as we continue to watch this conflict evolve and take shape that the Russians believe adamantly that the only solution right now for this conflict is the military solution. And what does that look like? So I want to read a very interesting article. It is a Dateline March 14th. The Kremlin said on Tuesday that Russia's goals in Ukraine could only be achieved by military force at the moment, and that Kiev needed to accept the quote-unquote new realities on the ground before a peaceful settlement could be achieved. We have to achieve our goals. Right now, this is only possible by military means due to the current position of the Kiev regime. Russian state news agencies quoted Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov as saying, Russia claims it is fighting in Ukraine to liberate Russian speakers in eastern Donbass from what it called neo-Nazi regime in Kiev. Ukraine and the West say this is a baseless pretext put forward to justify a war of aggression and Moscow's attempts to seize swaths of Ukrainian land. Peskov later told reporters that Ukraine would have to accept the new realities that have emerged since Moscow launched what it calls its special military operation in Ukraine last February. All of Moscow's requirements are well known. The de facto situation and new realities are well known. Without taking into account this set of issues, the transition to a peaceful settlement is impossible, he said. Moscow has repeatedly said that Ukraine would need to accept Russia's claimed annexation, reject it as illegal by Kiev, the West, and most countries at the United Nations of 4 regions of Ukraine that it partly occupies. Moscow has blamed Kiev for a breakdown in talks about the ceasefire, which stalled in the first weeks of the conflict. Anyway, so again, glaringly apparent that Russia at this point only sees a military outcome to this conflict. Now, why does this concern the West? Why is the West, Germany, France, the United States, the UK, becoming increasingly concerned about no end in sight for this current conflict? Well, one very big and glaring issue for the West is the supply of military equipment, or the possibility that certain Western countries is starting to feel the impact of all these weapons deliveries to the Ukrainians. And again, with no end in sight, with the Russian state continuing to ramp up its military-industrial complex to fight this war possibly in perpetuity until it sees a victory, And look, we've been here before. Now, we have not been here before. The Russians have been here before. And to say that the Russians are just going to pack up, go home in 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. Remember, at the start of this conflict, 90 days in, people were saying that, well, maybe the Russians are running out of steam, that they're just going to, again, pack it up and go home in a couple of more weeks or months. Well, we're over a year into this now, and none of that is happening. Now, more importantly, let's have a look at what's, for instance, concerning the Germans. And the German military is very concerned about what the weapons deliveries have done to the German military. So I think it's important to look at and have a quick look at the weapons deliveries that the German military, the German state, have handed over to the Ukrainians. The Germans were not prepared for this war. They were not prepared. They didn't have enough military surplus items stockpiled to continue this type of military operation, specifically handing over the amounts of equipment that they've handed over thus far. So let's look at what the Germans have handed over, and this is as of January 16th, 2023, so a couple of months ago. So this is the entire handover, the entire allotment of what the Germans have given the Ukrainians. And it's significant. And much of this has come from active German stocks, which would normally go to the German military. And the German military is starting to feel the lack of this equipment that have been handed over to the Ukrainians. 122 border protection vehicles, 7 mobile remote-controlled and protected mine-clearing systems, 168 mobile heating systems, 20 rocket launchers, 70mm or pickup trucks with rockets, 15 Bergpanzer II armored recovery vehicles, 13 tank transporter tractor Oshkosh M1070s, 7 tracked and remote-controlled infantry vehicles for support tasks, 143 pickup trucks, 270 generators, 26 load-handling trucks, 28 trucks Zetros, 10 roll-off containers, 30 mobile antenna mast systems, 35 load-handling 8x8-wheeler trucks, 26 reconnaissance drones, 36 ambulance vehicles, 36,000 wool blankets, 12,000 heavy-duty trailer trucks, 55 anti-drone sensors and jammers, 60 drone detection systems, 6 lift trucks, 1 Iris-T system, 3 launchers per system, and SLM missiles. Now this is the next part is where this has really drained German stockpiles. 60,000 rounds of ammunition, 40mm. 18,500 projectiles of 155mm caliber. 50 MRAP vehicles, dingoes. 10 unmanned surface vessels. 14,000 sleeping bags. 24 Mi-24 spare parts. That's from former East German stocks. Not a big deal. Spare parts for heavy machine gun M2. 32 frequency range extensions for anti-drone devices. 20 laser target designators. 17 heavy and medium bridge systems. 5 227mm M270 Mars 2 multiple launch rocket systems with ammunition. 14 self-propelled howitzers 2,000 delivered along with 10,500 155mm artillery rounds, joint project with the Netherlands. 200 tents, 116,000 winter jackets, 80,000 winter trousers, 240,000 winter hats, 120,000 first aid kits, 405,000 prepackaged military meals ready to eat, 34 self-propelled Gepard anti-aircraft guns, including 6,000 rounds of ammunition, 67 fridges for medical material, 1 counter battery radar system, Cobra, 4,000 rounds, practice ammunition for self-propelled anti-aircraft guns, 54 M113s, 53,000 rounds ammunition for self-propelled anti-aircraft guns, 20 70mm laser-guided rockets on pickup trucks. Now, let me pause there for a second. That doesn't sound like a lot. But you have to understand the German military was not spending the amount needed on its military to keep its military, its army, very well supplied. There are numerous reports of deficiencies in the German army prior to the war starting. So handing over all this equipment has simply exacerbated those ongoing issues. And I could continue here, and it continues for some time, and I think I would just be really just emphasizing what I've already said in terms of just how much equipment has been handed over and continues to be handed over. And again, the ability of the German army to maintain itself already prior to the conflict was not in a very good position. So it's interesting to see what the German army is saying right now, what is happening behind closed doors in terms of the current situation with the German army. And it's not good. So now let's go and let's zoom in on the frontline area, specifically near Bakhmut. And we're going to, as we have done before, go back in time where you, the viewer, can see what has happened over the last few days. So we're going to go at the very, very start of March, the very end of February, and then kind of fast forward. So as you can see, the fighting was on the eastern edges of Bakhmut, and then we'll now see where the fighting is taking place currently, up to the current date of today. So you can see the Russians are now essentially sealing off the ability of the Ukrainian military to supply itself. You can see these white lines are road networks into Bakhmut. So you have two main road networks that lead into Bakhmut. Now these areas in between these road networks are also being used. The Ukrainians have created artificial road networks that are not in very good condition. They are incredibly muddy, with many of these vehicles getting stuck and are just simply unable to circumnavigate these areas outside of these main arterial roads into Bakhmut. And again, as I've talked about before, you have roughly 3 Ukrainian brigades, 3, possibly 4 Ukrainian brigades operating in this area in Bakhmut itself. And those brigades right now simply don't have the ability, possibly up to 10,000 Ukrainian troops, they don't have the ability to get out of Bakhmut. So the only alternative right now for the Ukrainian military is to continue to fight for Bakhmut and reinforce its positions to the north and to the south of Bakhmut to try and keep this cauldron open. Because if it closes, which essentially it is closing as we speak, again, let's just kind of go back and look at what's happening. And you can see the method to the Russian madness in terms of what it's doing. Back, forward, again, cutting it off to the north, cutting it off to the south, back, forward. back to the first, going forward. Watch this area. Watch this area. So the fighting right now is taking place both on the western outskirts of the city in the south, approaching the center of the city. This area here, this gray area, is reported where fighting is taking place. Areas in orange, Russian control. Much of the southern sector of the city is currently being fought over. The Russians are now crossing this river that runs along the eastern half of the city, and then obviously in the north, the same thing. But these road networks are pivotal for the Ukrainians to maintain its forces in Bakhmut. So again, difficult now for the Ukrainians to get out, difficult for supply to come in. So what does that mean? Well, it's very likely at some point you could see a mass surrender of thousands of Ukrainian troops inside of Bakhmut. Is this absolutely going to happen? Well, we don't know. But based on what I am seeing, and again, this site that we're using is a site that is sympathetic to the Ukrainian cause. This does not look like a good situation. The U.S. military advised the Ukrainians that they should probably pull out of Bakhmut weeks ago. They didn't do that. They're still in Bakhmut. So again, unfortunately for the Ukrainians, it is becoming increasingly likely that you could see a mass surrender of multiple Ukrainian brigades inside of Bakhmut. And then obviously, as we talked about yesterday, we are seeing a massing of Russian forces to the northeast of Sloviansk in this area here. So we know right now there are elements, major elements of at least 3 to 4 Russian divisions massing in this area, to include airborne forces, forces from the 1st Guards Tank Army, and the 20th Combined Arms Army as well. So that is the current situation on the ground. And again, remember the rhetoric that I just discussed coming out of the Russian Foreign Ministry. That tells you the Russian position. They are going to continue this conflict until there is a military solution. Now, ultimately, we don't know what that looks like and how that ends, but right now that's the status quo, and this is concerning the West because this is a financial black hole. Eventually, military stockpiles that are being provided to the Ukrainians are going to run out, and what we understand right now is new equipment is having to be manufactured by the West and delivered to the Ukrainians. And one thing that concerns the West, concerns the United States, is no end date with a continued financial and military obligation. Sound familiar? Remember Afghanistan? Well, this is a much higher intensity than Afghanistan. Much, much greater. Umpteen gazillion times in magnitude. So the question is, when does it end? Well, it will end when the Russians decide it is going to end. Not when the Ukrainians say it's going to end, not when the United States say it's going to end. It's going to end when the Russians decide it's going to end. And unfortunately, we don't know what that's going to look like right now. So thank you for joining us today. We'll have more coverage very, very soon. And as always, have a good day.